White billionaire family humiliated a black woman at a party. She ended their $5 billion deal. Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Serve us drinks. Now. The words cut through the gala like glass dragged across marble. They came from a woman in a crimson gown, laughing as she raised her champagne flute, surrounded by men in tailored tuxedos and women draped in silk and diamonds. The kind of laughter that wasn't joy but permission. Permission to humiliate. Permission to reduce someone to a role they didn't choose. A black woman stood a few steps away, framed by golden light and towering columns. She wore a white off-the-shoulder gown, elegant, understated, impossible to ignore. Her posture was straight. Her expression controlled. A phone rested against her ear, her voice low, measured, private. The woman in red tilted her head, eyes glittering. "Didn't you hear me?" she said, louder now. "We're waiting." A ripple of amusement passed through the group. One man chuckled into his glass. Another leaned closer, whispering something that made the others grin. Phones appeared subtle at first, then obvious sleek black screens rising to capture the moment. This was a spectacle. And the room knew it. The black woman lowered her phone slowly. Around them, the ballroom shimmered, chandeliers blazing, white linen tables stretching into the distance, an orchestra murmuring through a waltz no one was listening to anymore. Conversations stalled. Heads turned. The air tightened. "I'm not staff," the woman said calmly. The laughter sharpened. "Oh," the woman in red replied, eyes flicking over the white gown with theatrical disbelief. "Of course not. My mistake." She glanced at her friends. "She's not staff." That sent them over the edge. Someone snorted. Someone else raised a brow and smirked. A man with old money confidence shrugged. "Then what are you doing standing there?" he asked. "You lost." The black woman didn't answer. She looked at each face in the circle, faces flushed with champagne and certainty, then at the wider room. The donors. The executives. The quiet observers pretending not to see. Her gaze didn't plead. It assessed. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories sparked change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to her." The woman in red sighed dramatically. "Security," she called, not breaking her smile. "We seem to have a situation." Two guards at the edge of the ballroom shifted, uncertain. They looked from the woman in red to the woman in white. From laughter to silence. From inherited authority to something colder. The orchestra faltered. A violin scraped, then stopped. The black woman reached down, smoothing the fabric of her gown with a small, precise motion. The phone was back in her hand now. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Someone near the group whispered, "She's really pushing it." Another replied, "People like that always do." The woman in red leaned closer, her voice dropping to a stage whisper meant to sting. "You should know your place," she said. "Places like this don't forgive mistakes." The black woman finally spoke again. Quiet. Even. Almost gentle. "I do know my place." She tapped her phone once. Across the room, a man in a charcoal suit watching from the shadows near the bar stiffened as his device vibrated. He read the message. Then read it again. His face drained of color. At the center of the ballroom, the woman in red lifted her glass, ready to reclaim the night. "Now," she said brightly, let's not let this little misunderstanding ruin the evening. But the temperature in the room had already dropped. Because the woman they had mistaken for nothing had just made a decision. And before this night was over, every laugh in that circle would come back to them itemized, documented, and paid for in full. The room didn't erupt. It didn't gasp or shout or descend into chaos. It did something far more revealing. It watched. Eyes followed the black woman as if she were no longer a person, but a question no one wanted to answer. Conversations resumed in fragments, low, careful, incomplete. Laughter returned in places, but thinner now, brittle around the edges. The woman in red leaned back into her circle, satisfied. In her world, silence meant submission. Honestly, she said, swirling her champagne, they really should brief the staff better for events like this. A man beside her smirked. You can always tell, he replied. They stand out. Across the ballroom, the black woman stood alone, phone in hand, her expression unreadable. The orchestra had started again, a soft piece meant to smooth over discomfort, but the music felt misplaced like makeup on a bruise. Security lingered closer now. Not confronting. Observing. One of the guards murmured, "Do you want us to?" The woman in red waved him off without looking. Not yet. Let her feel it. The cruelty wasn't loud anymore. It didn't need to be. It had evolved into something quieter, more confident. The kind that assumed victory. At a nearby table, a donor whispered to his wife, "She shouldn't have pushed back like that." His wife nodded. People need to know their lanes. The black woman heard none of it, or perhaps she heard all of it and chose not to respond. She moved toward the edge of the room, heels clicking softly against marble, passing beneath chandeliers that cast no warmth now. She stopped near the bar. A man in a charcoal suit stood there, pretending to check his phone while watching her from the corner of his eye. His jaw tightened as he typed. "Confirm receipt," he sent. A reply came almost instantly. "Confirmed. Standing by." He exhaled slowly. At the center of the gala, the host tapped a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced brightly, "thank you for your generosity tonight. In just a few minutes, we'll be making a very special announcement regarding a historic partnership." The woman in red smiled wider. She leaned toward her daughter. "This is the part I love," she whispered. "When everything comes together." Her daughter laughed. "Imagine being that woman," she said, glancing toward the bar. "Showing up where you don't belong, just to be reminded." The reminder, however, was already moving in the opposite direction. The black woman lifted her phone again, not to call, not to text. She simply read. Her shoulders relaxed. Across the room, the man in charcoal suit straightened, suddenly alert. He slipped his phone into his pocket and adjusted his tie. The expression on his face wasn't fear yet, but it was close. A waiter passed by the woman in white and hesitated. "Can I get you something?" he asked quietly. She looked at him, surprised for the first time that evening. "No," she said gently. "But thank you." At the main table, the woman in red raised her glass as the host continued speaking. "Tonight marks a turning point," the host said. "A deal years in the making." The words hung there. Unfinished. Somewhere behind the scenes, screens refreshed. Notifications queued. Documents shifted status. The black woman turned slightly, her gaze sweeping the room one last time. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. With certainty. And as applause began to rise premature, misplaced, the first crack formed beneath the polished surface of the evening. No one noticed it yet. But they would. The applause didn't land the way it was supposed to. It rose in uneven pockets, some enthusiastic, some delayed, some purely performative. The kind of clapping people offered when they sensed momentum but didn't fully understand what they were celebrating. At the head of the room, the host smiled tightly, eyes flicking toward the side of the stage where a screen glowed behind velvet curtains. Her cue hadn't changed. The script hadn't changed. But something else had. The woman in red didn't notice. Not at first. She was too busy basking in the moment she believed belonged to her family. Years of grooming donors. Years of appearances. Years of assuming the room would always bend in her direction. She leaned back, satisfied. "This is what power looks like," she murmured to the man beside her. He nodded, distracted, scrolling his phone. Then he froze. At the bar, the man in the charcoal suit felt his pulse spike as his phone vibrated again once, twice, 3 times. Messages stacked faster than he could open them. Legal looped in. Board notified. Hold announcement. His fingers hovered. He looked up, scanning the ballroom, and his eyes found the woman in white. She wasn't watching him. She was watching the screen. The host cleared her throat. "Before we proceed," she said, voice still bright but no longer relaxed, "we're going to take a brief pause." A pause. That wasn't on the agenda. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Glasses lowered. A few donors leaned forward, confused. The woman in red frowned. "What is she doing?" she whispered sharply. Her daughter shrugged. "Probably a technical thing." But the orchestra had stopped playing. Silence pressed in. Backstage, a technician leaned toward another. "Did we get a new slide?" he whispered. "No," the other replied. "But something just locked the system." At the bar, the black woman checked her phone once more. No urgency. No surprise. Just confirmation. She slipped the device back into her clutch. At the main table, the patriarch of the family who had remained quiet all evening finally spoke. "This shouldn't be taking this long," he said, irritation threading his voice. The man beside him swallowed. "Sir, we may have an issue." The word issue landed heavier than intended. "What kind of issue?" the patriarch asked. Before he could get an answer, phones began to buzz across the room. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just enough to be noticed. A donor glanced down. His brows knit together. Another donor checked her screen. Her smile faded. A third leaned toward his companion. "That can't be right," he whispered. The woman in red felt the shift before she understood it. The laughter had gone. The attention had moved subtly, instinctively away from her. She turned in her chair, scanning the room. People weren't looking at her anymore. They were looking at their phones. The host stood frozen at the microphone, waiting for instructions that weren't coming. Behind the curtain, the screen flickered once. Then again. The logo that had been looping all night, the family crest, gold and imposing, dimmed. A new line of text appeared beneath it. Small. Clean. Official. Pending review. A hush swept the ballroom. The woman in red stood abruptly. "What is this?" she demanded, voice cracking through the silence. Across the room, the black woman in white turned away from the bar. She didn't rush. She didn't smile. She simply began walking back toward the center of the room, heels steady, posture unshaken as the first realization settled over the crowd. The announcement wasn't late. It was unraveling. And whatever they thought they were celebrating tonight was no longer theirs to control. The black woman crossed the ballroom as if the floor belonged to her. Not hurried. Not cautious. Each step landed with quiet authority, heels echoing softly against marble that suddenly felt less permanent than it had minutes ago. Conversations died in her wake. People turned, not openly, not yet, but enough to track her movement, to feel the shift they could no longer explain away. At the main table, the woman in red remained standing, frozen between outrage and disbelief. "Excuse me," she said sharply, trying to reclaim the room. "There's clearly been a mistake." No one answered her. The patriarch leaned forward, his voice low, controlled. "Find out what's happening," he murmured to the man beside him. "I'm trying," the man whispered back, sweat beading at his temple. "Legal isn't responding." The black woman stopped a few feet from the table. Up close, the contrast was undeniable. The family was draped in excess jewels heavy, fabrics rich, confidence inherited. She wore nothing loud. Nothing desperate. Just composure, tailored and exact. The host finally found her voice. "Ma'am," she said uncertainly, stepping away from the microphone, "is there something we can help you with?" The black woman met her eyes. "No," she replied evenly. "You've done exactly what you were supposed to do." That answer landed wrong. The woman in red laughed once sharp, brittle. "This is absurd," she said. "Who do you think you are, interrupting?" She stopped when the black woman looked at her. Not with anger. With recognition. The kind that suggested this moment had already been decided. Behind them, the screen flickered again. The words "pending review" remained, unmoved. Phones buzzed harder now. No longer isolated. No longer ignorable. A donor near the aisle whispered, "The deal, did you see this?" Another replied, "They pulled it." Pulled what? All of it. The patriarch stood. Slowly. Carefully. He extended a hand, the gesture practiced, diplomatic. "Let's step aside," he said to the black woman, forcing a polite smile. "We can clear this up privately." She glanced at his hand. Then back to his face. "There's nothing private about what happened tonight," she said. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. A hush fell again, deeper this time. Heavier. At the edge of the room, the man in the charcoal suit finally moved. He approached the table, leaning in close to the patriarch's ear. "Sir," he whispered urgently, "the partnership announcement is off. The documents were voided." The patriarch stiffened. "By whom?" The man swallowed. "By the principal." Silence. The woman in red scoffed. "Principal," she repeated. "You make it sound like—" She stopped. Because the black woman had reached into her clutch again. This time, she didn't look at the phone. She placed it on the table between them. "Face up." The screen lit, displaying a single line of text, clean, unmistakable. "Termination confirmed. Effective immediately." The woman in red stared at it, her smile collapsing in real time. "That's impossible," she said. "You don't have that authority." The black woman finally spoke again. "Yes," she said calmly. "I do." And for the first time that evening, the family understood the truth they had missed from the very beginning. They hadn't humiliated a nobody. They had dismissed the one person the entire night depended on. And there would be no undoing that mistake. The truth spread through the ballroom the way smoke does, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. "What do you mean terminated?" someone whispered near the aisle. "I mean gone," another replied, eyes locked on his phone. "Every tranche. Every clause. It's all been pulled." At the main table, the patriarch's face hardened into something brittle and dangerous. He stared at the phone on the table as if it might correct itself if he waited long enough. "This deal has safeguards," he said carefully, more to the room than to her. "Years of negotiations. Conditions. Penalties." The black woman didn't interrupt him. She let him finish. "Safeguards protect assumptions," she said when he stopped. "They don't protect entitlement." A ripple moved through the guests. Not laughter this time. Calculation. Across the room, donors were already stepping away from conversations, forming small clusters. Quiet calls were made. Names were exchanged in lowered voices. People who had arrived confident now spoke like travelers checking exit routes. The woman in red tried to recover first. She always did. "This is theater," she said sharply, forcing a smile that no longer convinced even her daughter. "You don't cancel something like this on a whim. This is posturing." The black woman turned her head slightly, acknowledging her presence without granting her control. "A whim," she repeated. "Is spilling wine. A whim is laughing when you think no one important is watching." She gestured subtly toward the crowd. "This," she continued, "is a decision." Behind them, the host stood uselessly near the microphone, frozen between protocol and panic. The orchestra had not resumed. The silence had become structural load-bearing. A donor near the front cleared his throat. "Is it true the funding line was contingent on her approval?" he asked no one in particular. Another answered before the family could. "It was. She was the final signatory." Eyes shifted. Heads turned. The woman in red felt it then, the attention draining from her, rerouting around her, landing somewhere else. She straightened, desperate to reassert gravity. "You can't just walk in here and dismantle everything," she snapped. "This event, this family, doesn't belong to you," the black woman finished softly. "It never did." The patriarch exhaled through his nose, fighting for composure. "If you had an issue," he said, "there were ways to address it." She met his gaze. "There were ways to prevent it." The words landed like a ledger closing. Phones buzzed again. Louder now. Faster. A notification banner flashed across a donor's screen, then another. "Partnership withdrawn. Announcement cancelled. Effective immediately." A man near the bar cursed under his breath. "This is going to move markets." "It already has," someone replied. The woman in red backed away from the table, heels unsteady. "You think this makes you powerful," she said, voice thinning. "You think humiliating us like this?" "I didn't humiliate you," the black woman said. "You did that yourselves." She picked up her phone from the table, slipping it back into her clutch with finality. "This evening," she continued, "was supposed to be a celebration. You chose to make it a test." She glanced around the room at the donors, the staff, the security who no longer knew where to stand. "You failed." The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was understanding. Because everyone there could see it now, the gala hadn't collapsed because of a deal. It collapsed because the wrong people assumed they were untouchable. And the woman they had dismissed had just proved them wrong without raising her voice once. The black woman turned away from the table before anyone could stop her. Not in retreat. In conclusion. Her heels traced a straight line across the marble floor, each step measured, unhurried, final. The crowd parted instinctively, not out of respect, but uncertainty. The kind that follows when power changes hands without permission. Behind her, the woman in red found her voice again, thinner now, edged with panic. "You can't just leave," she snapped. "You don't end a night like this and walk away." The black woman didn't turn around. "This night ended the moment you decided who I was," she said calmly. Security shifted again, but this time they weren't looking at the family for direction. Their eyes followed her. Waiting. Measuring. The patriarch stood rigid, fists clenched at his sides. He watched donors drift, some toward the exits, others toward each other, already renegotiating futures that no longer included his name. The room he had dominated minutes ago now felt foreign, hostile. "Fix this," he hissed to the man in the charcoal suit. The man swallowed. "There's nothing left to fix." At the edge of the ballroom, a donor approached the black woman hesitantly. "Ma'am," he said, lowering his voice, "if there's any way to discuss." She stopped and looked at him. "Not tonight," she said gently. That gentleness carried more authority than anger ever could. He nodded and stepped back. The host returned to the microphone, hands trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "due to unforeseen circumstances, tonight's program will conclude earlier than planned. A wave of murmurs followed. Chairs scraped. Glasses were set down untouched. The illusion of celebration collapsed fully now, revealing what had always been underneath: calculation, fear, self-preservation. The woman in red sank back into her chair, staring at the table where the phone had been moments earlier. "This isn't over," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Across the room, her daughter stared at the black woman's retreating figure, something new flickering behind her eyes. Not anger. Recognition. At the doors, the black woman paused briefly. She looked back once, not at the family, not at the host, but at the room as a whole. "This wasn't about a deal," she said quietly. "It was about respect." No one argued. The doors opened. Cool night air slipped into the ballroom, cutting through the warmth of chandeliers and pretense. She stepped through. Outside, the city waited, unimpressed, indifferent, vast. A car idled at the curb. The driver straightened when he saw her. "Good evening," he said. She nodded and got in. Inside the ballroom, the sound of the doors closing echoed longer than it should have. Because everyone left behind understood the same thing now. The woman they had tried to erase hadn't just taken her power with her. She had taken the future they were counting on. And there would be no invitation, no apology, no amount of money that could bring it back. The fallout didn't wait for morning. It began before the valet finished closing the last door. Inside the ballroom, phones kept vibrating, then ringing, then being silenced in panic. Conversations broke apart mid-sentence as alerts stacked faster than explanations. The family's inner circle huddled, voices low, movements sharp, each person trying to calculate distance from the blast. In a quiet corridor near the service elevators, the man in the charcoal suit finally reached legal. "It's confirmed," he said, pressing the phone to his ear. "All instruments terminated. No appeal window." A pause. Then, "Yes. Effective immediately." He ended the call and leaned against the wall, eyes closing for half a second too long. Back in the main hall, the patriarch stood alone now. The people who had once orbited him with smiles and deference had scattered, some already leaving, others pretending to be engrossed in conversations that excluded his name. A woman he'd known for 20 years avoided his gaze. Another offered a tight nod and disappeared into the crowd. At the head table, the woman in red stared at her phone, refreshing the same page over and over as if repetition might rewrite reality. Her daughter whispered, "Mother, it's trending." "What is?" she snapped. "Our name." The word trending landed like an insult. Screens across the room, tablets, phones, watches glowed with headlines forming in real time. Analysts were already speculating. Commentators were already guessing. The story was assembling itself without permission. Historic partnership abruptly withdrawn. Sources cite internal review. Unclear fallout. The host slipped away from the microphone, face pale, murmuring apologies that no one was listening to anymore. In the parking lot below, engines turned over. Drivers opened doors. Guests left early, glancing back at the building as if it might collapse behind them. Upstairs, security finally received clear instructions. "Lock it down," someone said. "No press." But it was too late. Press didn't need access anymore. The numbers were enough. At the bar, two donors spoke in hushed tones. "She didn't just cancel the deal," one said. "She pulled the floor out." The other nodded grimly. "And she did it clean." Silence returned in waves, no longer dramatic, no longer charged. Just empty. At the center of the ballroom, beneath chandeliers that no longer impressed anyone, the woman in red sank into her chair, the night finally catching up to her. For the first time, she understood the scale of what had happened. This wasn't a setback. It was an erasure. And it had been executed with a single decision made calmly, publicly, and without mercy. By morning, the city was already awake to the consequences. News tickers rolled beneath glass towers. Financial blogs refreshed their headlines every few minutes. Phones buzzed on kitchen counters and bedside tables long before alarms went off. The gala was over, but the story had only begun. Inside offices across the city, assistants whispered behind closed doors. Executives cancelled meetings that no longer mattered. Partners who had once fought for proximity now fought for distance. The family's name, once spoken with admiration, was suddenly paired with words like instability, risk, review. No one said humiliation out loud. They didn't need to. At the family's headquarters, the boardroom filled early. Too early. Coffee went untouched. Screens displayed charts sloping in the wrong direction. "This is temporary," the patriarch insisted, though his voice no longer carried weight. "A misunderstanding. It can be resolved." No one answered him. Across the table, a board member cleared her throat. "We've already received inquiries," she said carefully. "2 partners are reconsidering their exposure." Another added, "3 more want reassurance." A third didn't bother softening it. "They want out." The woman in red sat rigid at the far end, sunglasses still on indoors, jaw clenched as she scrolled through messages that kept getting worse. "Call me. We need to talk. This doesn't look good." She closed the phone and stared at the polished table, seeing her reflection warped in the shine. For the first time, there was no crowd to perform for. Across town, the black woman moved through her morning without urgency. Sunlight filtered through tall windows. Her phone rested face down on the table as she reviewed documents laid neatly beside a cup of untouched coffee. A knock sounded at the door. Her assistant stepped in quietly. "It's moving fast," she said. "Faster than expected." The black woman nodded. "It always does once people realize they were wrong. Do you want to make a statement?" She considered it for a moment. Then shook her head. "They've said enough already." Back at the headquarters, voices rose. Accusations followed. Someone mentioned legal options. Someone else mentioned damage control. But the truth hovered unspoken in the room. No apology would reopen what had been closed. No explanation would change how it looked. They hadn't lost power overnight. They had revealed they never truly held it. And everyone watching, from investors to strangers scrolling headlines, could see it clearly now. The reckoning wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was already complete. The story didn't end with headlines. It ended quietly, where power always does. Weeks later, the ballroom had returned to its usual schedule. New events. New banners. New names projected in soft gold light. But something invisible had changed. People spoke more carefully there now. They checked guest lists twice. They listened when someone stood alone instead of laughing first. Memory had settled into the walls. Across the city, the family's empire continued, smaller, diminished, cautious. Properties were sold quietly. Partnerships dissolved without ceremony. Invitations arrived less often, and when they did, they carried less certainty. The woman in red stopped hosting. No one announced it. No one needed to. Her absence spoke louder than her presence ever had. At a different table, in a different building, the black woman reviewed a report with steady focus. Numbers aligned. Decisions followed. Work continued, not out of vengeance, but purpose. Her assistant paused at the door. "There's been a donation request," she said. "A foundation focused on access programs." They asked anonymously. The black woman considered it for a moment. Then nodded. "Approve it." "Under which name?" She thought briefly. "Use the foundation," she said. "Not mine." The assistant smiled and left. Later that evening, as the city lights came on one by one, the black woman stood by the window, looking out over streets that carried millions of stories, some loud, some unseen. She didn't replay the gala in her mind. She didn't need to. What mattered wasn't the humiliation. It was the correction. Somewhere, someone would hear the story and recognize themselves not as the victim, not as the villain, but as the witness. Someone who would pause before laughing. Someone who would choose restraint over cruelty. That was enough. Power, she knew, didn't announce itself. It revealed itself only when challenged. And the lesson left behind was simple, unavoidable, and permanent. Dignity doesn't demand recognition. But disrespect always comes with a cost.